The thunder rolled across the plains as Josephine Lambert clutched her torn shawl tighter around her shoulders, her wrists raw from the coarse rope binding them. The man dragging her through the mud had not spoken a single word since he'd ambushed the stagecoach, his face hidden beneath a dirty bandana, eyes cold as winter in the Wyoming Territory. It was 1878, and Josephine had been traveling west to start anew after her father's passing left her with nothing but debts and heartache in Boston. The stagecoach journey had promised a fresh beginning in Sweetwater, where her mother's cousin had offered her a position as a schoolteacher. Now, that dream seemed as distant as the fading horizon, where storm clouds gathered thick as molasses. "Please," she begged, stumbling as her captor yanked her forward. "Whatever ransom you seek, I cannot provide it. I have nothing of value." The man turned, his dark eyes narrowing. He pulled down his bandana, revealing a scarred face and yellowed teeth. "Ain't about money, missy. Jeb Thornton pays good for pretty things to entertain his men. Mining camps got everything 'cept women. You'll fetch a fine price." Horror washed over Josephine like ice water. She had heard whispers of such terrible fates befalling women in the untamed territories, but had dismissed them as exaggerations meant to frighten proper Eastern ladies from venturing west. "I would rather die," she said, forcing steel into her voice despite the trembling of her limbs. The man let out a humorless laugh. "Ain't your choice to make." As they reached a clearing where a saddled horse waited, the sky opened up. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the earth beneath their feet to slick mud. Thunder cracked overhead, and Josephine's captor cursed, struggling to keep his footing while maintaining his grip on her bindings. A distant sound rose above the storm hoofbeats, fast and determined. Through the curtain of rain appeared a lone rider, tall in the saddle, moving with purpose through the downpour. "Help!" Josephine screamed, her voice nearly drowned by thunder. "Please help me." Her captor yanked her roughly, drawing a pistol from his belt. "Shut your mouth or I'll shut it permanent-like." The approaching rider slowed, and Josephine could make out broad shoulders beneath a slicker, the brim of a Stetson pulled low against the rain. Lightning flashed, illuminating the scene in stark white, the rider's hand resting on a holstered revolver, the glint of determination in his eyes. "Let the lady go," came a deep voice, steady as bedrock. "Mind your business, stranger," her captor snarled, raising his pistol. "This one's spoken for." What happened next unfolded faster than Josephine could comprehend. The rider's hand moved in a blur, his revolver clearing leather before her captor could squeeze his trigger. A single shot rang out, barely distinguishable from the thunder overhead. Her captor howled, clutching his wrist as his weapon fell to the mud. "I won't ask again," the rider said, dismounting in one fluid motion, keeping his revolver trained on the wounded man. Josephine's captor looked from his bleeding hand to the determined face of the cowboy, then spat in the mud. "Take her then. Ain't worth dying over." He backed away, then turned and ran, disappearing into the storm-swept landscape. The cowboy approached cautiously, holstering his weapon. Up close, Josephine could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with eyes the color of a summer sky and a strong jawline shadowed with several days' growth of beard. "Are you hurt, madam?" he asked, pulling a knife from his belt to cut her bindings. "Not severely," Josephine answered, wincing as the rope fell away from her abraded wrists. "Thank you, sir. You saved me from a fate worse than death." "Name's Hank Dawson," he said, removing his slicker and draping it over her shoulders. "And no thanks needed. Couldn't ride past a lady in distress." "Josephine Lambert," she replied, gratitude warming her despite the chill of the rain. "I was on the Sweetwater stagecoach when we were attacked." Hank nodded grimly. "Heard shots while I was riding fence for the Triple R. Found the coach about 2 miles back. drivers wounded but alive. Other passengers got away. Relief flooded through her. Thank heavens. Storm's getting worse, Hank observed, glancing at the blackening sky. My ranch is closer than town. We should get you somewhere dry before you catch your death. Too exhausted to argue, Josephine allowed him to help her onto his horse. He mounted behind her, his chest solid against her back as he reached around for the reins. The warmth of him seeped through her sodden dress, and for the first time since the attack, she felt safe. Hold tight, Miss Lambert, he said, his breath warm against her ear. It's going to be a rough ride. They rode through the worsening storm, Hank's strong arms keeping her secure in the saddle. The landscape blurred around them, trees bending in the howling wind, but Hank guided his horse with unwavering confidence. Despite the circumstances, Josephine found herself acutely aware of his proximity, of the steady rhythm of his breathing, of the way his hand occasionally squeezed her arm reassuringly when the thunder made her jump. After what seemed like hours, a small ranch house appeared through the rain, lantern light glowing in the windows. A barn stood nearby, and Hank directed his horse toward it. Let's get Hurricane stabled first, he explained as they dismounted inside the barn's shelter. Then we'll see to those wrists of yours. Josephine stood to the side, shivering despite his slicker, as Hank efficiently removed the saddle and rubbed down his horse. There was something comforting in watching his practiced movements, the gentle way he spoke to the animal, the obvious care in his touch. You live here alone? She asked, trying to distract herself from the throbbing pain in her wrists. Hank nodded. Just me and the horses since Pa passed last winter. Got a few hands that help with the cattle, but they bunk in the bunkhouse when they're not out on the range. He hung the saddle on its rack and turned to her. Ready to make a run for the house? It's not far, but we'll get soaked again. Josephine squared her shoulders. After everything else today, a little more rain hardly seems worth worrying about. A smile crossed his face, transforming his features from merely handsome to something that made Josephine's heart skip a beat. I like your spirit, Miss Lambert. They dashed through the downpour to the house, Hank ushering her inside with a hand at the small of her back. The interior was simple but neat: a main room with a stone fireplace, wooden table with 4 chairs, and a rocking chair beside a small bookshelf. Through an open door, she glimpsed a bed covered with a patchwork quilt. It's not much, Hank said, sounding almost apologetic as he lit more lanterns. But it's dry and warm. It's wonderful, Josephine replied honestly. After the day's ordeal, the modest ranch house seemed like a palace. Hank built up the fire while Josephine stood dripping on the rag rug, unsure what to do with herself in a strange man's home. Despite his heroism, she was acutely aware of the impropriety of their situation, a young unmarried woman alone with a bachelor in his home. As if reading her thoughts, Hank spoke while stoking the flames. There's a trunk in the bedroom with some of my mother's old things. You're welcome to find something dry to change into. I'll make us some coffee and see what I can rustle up for supper. Grateful for his consideration, Josephine retreated to the bedroom. The trunk at the foot of the bed contained several dresses, simpler than what she was accustomed to in Boston but clean and well-preserved. She selected a blue calico dress that looked closest to her size and changed quickly, wincing as the fabric brushed against her injured wrists. When she emerged, Hank had shed his wet coat and boots and was stirring something on the stove. He'd rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing tanned, muscular forearms. He glanced up, and Josephine felt a flush creep into her cheeks at the appreciation in his gaze. That was my mother's favorite, he said, nodding at the dress. Suits you. Thank you for lending it to me. I hope you don't mind. She'd be pleased someone was getting use out of it, he replied, a hint of sadness crossing his features. Been gone 5 years now. Consumption. I'm sorry for your loss, Josephine said softly. Hank nodded in acknowledgement, then gestured to the table. Sit. Let me see those wrists. He brought over a basin of warm water, clean cloths, and a small tin of salve. With surprising gentleness for such large hands, he cleaned the rope burns, his touch light as a feather. How did you learn to do this? Josephine asked, trying to distract herself from both the sting of her injuries and the strange flutter in her stomach each time his fingers brushed her skin. When you work cattle, someone's always getting hurt, he explained, carefully applying the salve. Pa made sure I knew how to patch up man and beast alike. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Hank agreed, a small smile playing at his lips. Ornery as a mule sometimes, but wise all the same. He finished wrapping a clean bandage around her wrist and moved to the other. What brings you to Wyoming Territory, Miss Lambert? Don't seem like the kind of place a refined Boston lady would choose. Josephine raised an eyebrow. How did you know I'm from Boston? Your accent, he replied with a slight grin. And the quality of that torn dress you were wearing. Not the kind of thing you'd find in Sweetwater. You're observant, Mr. Dawson, she said, impressed despite herself. Hank, please, he corrected. And out here, being observant keeps you alive. Josephine hesitated, then decided honesty was the least she owed her rescuer. My father was a businessman in Boston. When he died 6 months ago, I discovered his affairs were not as prosperous as he'd led everyone to believe. After the creditors took everything, I had few options. My mother's cousin in Sweetwater offered me a position teaching at the new school they're establishing. Hank finished bandaging her second wrist. Teaching suits you, I'd wager. Got a patience about you. How could you possibly know that? You haven't complained once about those wrists, though I know they must hurt something fierce. He returned the medical supplies to a cupboard. And you're talking to me like I'm worth conversing with, despite me being just a rancher with dirt under my nails. Josephine frowned. You saved my life, Mr. Dawson. Hank. I'd say that makes you very much worth conversing with, regardless of your occupation. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure before he turned to check the pot on the stove. Hope you don't mind, Stu. It's what I had ready. It smells wonderful, she assured him. They ate at the small table, the storm raging outside making the warmth of the house feel all the more precious. Hank asked about Boston, and Josephine found herself telling him about the crowded streets, the cultural events, the changing seasons in the common. In turn, he spoke of ranch life, of cattle drives and breaking horses, of the beauty of the Wyoming landscape in all its harsh glory. What will you do now? He asked as they finished their meal. Your stagecoach won't be continuing to Sweetwater anytime soon. Josephine stared into her coffee cup, reality crashing back upon her. I hadn't thought that far ahead, she admitted. I suppose I'll have to find a way to send word to Mrs. Peterson, my mother's cousin, explaining the delay. I'll ride into town tomorrow, weather permitting, Hank offered. Can send a telegram for you. That's very kind, but I've imposed on you enough already. No imposition, he said firmly. Besides, I need to alert the sheriff about what happened. Man who took you is known around these parts. Gil Reston. Works with a gang that raids stagecoaches and settlements. Sheriff's been after them for months. Josephine shuddered at the memory of her captor's cold eyes. He said something about selling me to a man named Jeb Thornton for his mining camp. Hank's expression darkened. Thornton runs a mining operation up in the hills. Nasty piece of work. Treats his men like slaves and worse. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers briefly. You're safe now, I promise. The simple touch sent warmth spreading through her veins, and Josephine found herself believing him completely. That night, Despite Hank's protests, Josephine slept in his bed while he made a pallet by the fire in the main room. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully, her dreams haunted by Gil Reston's leering face and the terror of being dragged through the mud. Each time she woke gasping, the sound of rain on the roof and the knowledge that Hank was just beyond the door gradually calmed her racing heart. Morning arrived with clearing skies and golden sunlight streaming through the small window. Josephine rose, smoothing the borrowed dress as best she could, and ventured into the main room. Hank was already up, frying bacon on the stove. He turned at her approach, and the smile that lit his face made her breath catch. "Morning," he greeted. "Sleep well." "Better than I expected to," she admitted. "Though I fear I've displaced you from your bed." "Slept fine out here," he assured her, setting a plate of bacon and eggs before her. "Need to check on some calves after breakfast, then I'll head into town. Anything particular you want in that telegram?" Over breakfast, Josephine composed a message explaining her situation to Mrs. Peterson. "I should accompany you to town," she suggested as Hank copied down her words. "I can't continue to impose on your hospitality." "Wouldn't be safe," Hank countered. "Reston's gang might still be looking for you. Better you stay here until I can arrange proper escort to Sweetwater." Though part of her bristled at being told what to do, the rational side of Josephine knew he was right. "Very well. But please, let me earn my keep while I'm here. I notice your mending basket is rather full." Hank's ears reddened slightly. "Never was much good with a needle." "Then it's settled. You see to your ranch duties, and I'll see to the domestic ones." After he'd gone to check his cattle, Josephine set about putting the small house in order. She washed the breakfast dishes, swept the floor, and tackled the mending basket with determination. The simple domestic tasks were soothing after the previous day's trauma, and she found herself humming as she darned socks and patched shirts. When Hank returned for a midday meal, he paused in the doorway, staring at the transformed interior. Sunlight streamed through freshly washed windows, the floor gleamed from scrubbing, and the smell of baking bread filled the air. "Did I walk into the wrong house?" he asked, a slow smile spreading across his face. Josephine felt a surprising surge of pride. "I hope you don't mind. I found flour and yeast in your pantry and thought fresh bread would be nice." "Mind? Miss Lambert, you're welcome to stay and bake bread as long as you please." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary before he looked away, clearing his throat. "I'll wash up and head to town. Should be back before dark." After Hank departed, Josephine continued her domestic assault on the bachelor's home, finding satisfaction in each improvement. She was hanging freshly washed curtains when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Assuming Hank had returned early, she stepped onto the porch with a welcoming smile that froze on her face when she saw 3 riders approaching, none of them Hank. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the man in the lead. Gil Reston had found her. Josephine darted back inside, slamming the door and dropping the wooden bar into place. Her heart pounded as she searched frantically for a weapon, settling on Hank's rifle mounted above the fireplace. She'd never fired a gun in her life, but they couldn't know that. "Come on out, Missy," Reston's voice called from outside. "Make this easy on yourself. I have a rifle and I know how to use it," she shouted back, praying her voice didn't betray her terror. Raucous laughter answered her. "Sure you do, city girl. You got 5 minutes to come out peaceful-like, or we burn this place to the ground with you in it." Josephine's mind raced. She could try to slip out the back and run, but where would she go? She had no horse, and the open range offered little cover. Fighting seemed futile, one woman against 3 armed men. But surrender meant a fate she couldn't bear to contemplate. A crash against the door made her jump. They were trying to break in. Josephine positioned herself with the rifle, trying to remember how she'd seen men hold such weapons. The door shuddered under another impact. Just as the wood began to splinter, the sound of gunfire erupted outside but not directed at the house. She heard shouts, more gunfire, the pounding of hooves. "Josephine!" Hank's voice called. "Are you all right?" Relief flooded through her. "I'm here. I'm safe." After a few moments of silence, a gentle knock came at the door. "It's me, Josephine. It's over." She lifted the bar with trembling hands and opened the door to find Hank standing there, his expression grim but relieved. Behind him, she could see two bodies on the ground and a third man, Gil Reston, sitting slumped against a fence post, blood seeping from his shoulder, hands tied behind his back. "You're hurt," she gasped, noticing blood on Hank's sleeve. "Just a graze," he assured her, stepping inside. "Sheriff Connolly was riding out to check on a disturbance when I ran into him in town. Told him what happened yesterday, and he insisted on coming back with me. Good thing he did." The sheriff appeared behind Hank, a weathered man with a silver mustache. "Madam," he greeted, tipping his hat. "Caught these varmints by surprise. Reston's alive, he'll stand trial for his crimes, along with whatever's left of his gang after we round him up." "Thank you, Sheriff," Josephine said sincerely. "I'll take this trash back to town," the sheriff continued, addressing Hank. "You see to that arm and the lady. I'll send Doc Simmons out to check on you both tomorrow." After the sheriff departed with his prisoner, Josephine insisted on treating Hank's wound. It was indeed just a graze, but it required cleaning and bandaging. "Seems we're taking turns patching each other up," he commented as she worked. "I'm just grateful you arrived when you did," she replied, her fingers gentle against his skin. "How did you know to come back early?" "Didn't sit right leaving you here alone," he admitted. "Was halfway to town when I decided to circle back and check. Saw their tracks leading this way and pushed hurricane hard to get here in time." Josephine finished securing the bandage, then, without thinking, pressed her lips to his forearm just above the wrapping. The moment the gesture was complete, she froze, mortified by her forwardness. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "That was inappropriate." Hank caught her hand before she could pull away entirely. "Don't apologize," he said softly. "Not for that." Their eyes met, and Josephine felt something shift between them, a recognition, a possibility. But the moment was interrupted by the necessities of the aftermath. Securing the ranch, preparing a meal, discussing what would happen next. Over supper, Hank explained that he'd managed to send her telegram before meeting the sheriff. "Mrs. Peterson replied right away," he said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "Says she's relieved you're safe and to take all the time you need to recover before continuing to Sweetwater." Josephine accepted the telegram, a strange mix of emotions washing over her. The teaching position still waited her new beginning, her independence. Yet the thought of leaving the ranch, of leaving Hank, created an unexpected ache in her chest. "The stage won't run again for at least a week," Hank continued, studying his plate. "You're welcome to stay here until then, or longer if you need." "That's very generous," she said carefully. "It's selfish, actually," he admitted, finally meeting her gaze. "Having you here these past 2 days has been good. The house hasn't felt this much like a home since Ma died." Josephine's heart quickened. "Hank, I know it's fast," he interrupted, words tumbling out now. "Too fast, probably. You don't know me, not really, and you've got plans in Sweetwater. But I'd be lying if I said I wanted you to go." The raw honesty in his voice stole her breath. In Boston, courtship was a careful dance of social calls and chaperoned outings, of subtle hints and proper distance. This direct confession should have scandalized her. Instead, it felt refreshingly true, like everything about this man who had saved her life and now seemed determined to claim her heart as well. "I've known you barely 2 days," she said softly. "Some things don't need time," he replied. "Sometimes you just know." The week that followed was both ordinary and extraordinary. By day, they fell into a comfortable routine, Hank tending his ranch, Josephine managing the household. They worked side by side mending fences, caring for a sick calf, harvesting vegetables from the small kitchen garden. In the evenings, they sat before the fire, talking for hours about everything and nothing. Josephine learned that Hank had fought briefly in the final months of the Civil War despite being barely 18, that he traveled through much of the West before returning to help his ailing father with the ranch, that he read voraciously during the long winter months and could recite entire passages of Shakespeare from memory. In turn, she told him of her childhood in Boston, of her love for teaching that had begun when she'd helped instruct her younger cousins, of her secret ambition to someday write stories of her own. Each revelation, each shared memory, each quiet laugh strengthened the connection between them. Doc Simmons visited as promised, declaring both their injuries to be healing nicely. The sheriff sent word that Gil Reston had been jailed awaiting trial, and that Jeb Thornton's mining operation was being investigated based on information Reston had provided in hopes of a lighter sentence. As the day of the stagecoach's scheduled return approached, the unspoken question hung between them. On the eve of her potential departure, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "It's beautiful here," Josephine said, breaking the comfortable silence. "So different from Boston. Wilder, yes, but there's a purity to it." Hank nodded, his profile strong against the fading light. "First time I saw these plains, I knew I'd never be happy anywhere else." He turned to her, his expression earnest. "The teaching position in Sweetwater, is it what you truly want?" Josephine considered the question carefully. "A week ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. It represented independence, a new beginning." She paused, gathering her courage. "But now I find myself wondering if beginnings can take different forms than we expect." Hope kindled in Hank's eyes. "The school in Sweetwater isn't the only one needing teachers. Folks around here have been talking about establishing one closer to the ranches. Children have to ride too far currently." "Are you proposing I stay to teach, Mr. Dawson?" she asked, her heart quickening. "I'm proposing more than that, Miss Lambert," he said, taking her hand gently. "I'm proposing you stay to build something with me. A school, yes, but also a life." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "This was my mother's. Before she died, she made me promise I'd only give it to a woman who brought light back into this house." His voice grew husky with emotion. "I know it's soon, too soon by proper standards. But out here, life doesn't always allow for long courtships." Josephine stared at the ring, emotions warring within her. The practical side warned that she barely knew this man, that rushing into marriage was reckless. But her heart recognized something her mind could not fully articulate: a certainty, a rightness to being here with him that defied rational explanation. "I don't want a marriage of convenience or gratitude," she said carefully. "If I stay, it must be because we truly believe we can build happiness together." "Josephine," Hank said, lifting her chin so their eyes met, "saving you may have been what brought you into my life, but it's not why I want you to stay. I want you because in 2 days you transformed a house into a home. Because you're brave and kind and stubborn in all the right ways. Because when I look at you, I see not just who you are now, but all we could be together." Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming certainty. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll marry you." His smile could have outshone the setting sun as he slipped the ring onto her finger. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home to a place she'd never been before but had always been meant to find. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in town, with Sheriff Connolly giving the bride away and Mrs. Peterson traveling from Sweetwater to attend. The school near the ranching communities was established by spring, with Josephine as its teacher. Their first child, a daughter, arrived the following winter, with a son joining the family 2 years later. In time, the story of how they met became something of a legend in the area, how Josephine had been dragged toward a savage fate until Hank rode through the storm and held her close, changing both their destinies forever. But what the legend couldn't capture was the quiet moments that truly built their life together. Hank listening intently as Josephine read aloud by firelight. Josephine watching with pride as Hank gently taught their children to ride. The two of them standing on their porch each evening, surveying the land that had brought them together, hands clasped as tightly as their hearts. Years later, when asked if she regretted abandoning her plans for independence, Josephine would smile and say that true freedom wasn't found in being alone, but in choosing the right person with whom to share your life. In Hank Dawson, she had found not just a rescuer, but a partner who valued her mind as much as her heart, who had given her not just a home, but a horizon as boundless as the Wyoming sky.